Hello, everyone. I feel that I would love to see you as well, but now you will only see me in the video. So hopefully we will meet again before the end of the semester, at least through the use of the internet. So today is one topic that I really love. This is not to say that I don't love all the topics in this course about transformative leadership and spirituality, but more specifically, how can I enrich the world? And I'm sure that many of you are already in the process of enriching the world in one way or another, right? We make the lives of the people around us better, more interesting, more inspiring, or we create beautiful things like we noticed in our topic on creativity. So we will talk about our different ways of enriching the world and how is it that we can develop certain inner abilities that would bring the best of who we are into the world. And this is a quote that I think speaks very well about our ways in which we can enrich the world, because many times we don't really know how to do it. And the best answer is to do the things that make us feel the most joy. So this is a quote from Howard Thurman, who was a leader in political activism in the civil rights in the United States. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So he talks about that passion, that burning desires that we have inside of ourselves to bring something into the world. And this is what gives us vitality. And this is what is enriching the world in ways in which we cannot define until we do those things. So this is an interesting process. Now, the article from Parker Palmer, I hope that you all had time to go through it, talks about that dichotomy we have in our Western world between action and contemplation, right? So he talks about aliveness as being a good negotiation between action and contemplation. We all need to act into the world. We all need some form of work that gives us meaning. But at the same time, we also need the capacity to contemplate, to understand how things work, to relax. So our culture is creating an either-or opposition between action and contemplation. There is no creative tension. So what happens is that too much action leads to a frantic imposing of our will on the world. And probably all of you are familiar with the tendency of our Western culture towards too much action. We are all too busy. We are all in a constant state of being hurried and under constant stress and pressure. On the other hand, too much contemplation, when it is not balanced by proper action, leads to escapism and false bliss, which is what we usually do when we take our 1 week holiday, right? We experience a temporary bliss that will only throw us back again into the turmoil of that frenzied, active life that we are all performing. So he defines action and contemplation in ways that are really interesting to grasp. So through action, we both express, I'm quoting here from Palmer, and learn something of who we are, of the kind of world we have or want. When we act, the world acts back, and we and the world are co-created. So action is creating a constant interdependent relationship between us and the world, right? So we put out something in the world and the world answers back in a certain way, maybe asking for other things or asking for us to do things differently. So action has this tension between the individual having an impact on the world and also the individual being changed by the world. So this is that tension between inner and outer that we talked about in our on-site conversations, that there is not only one way process of us influencing the world, but the world influencing us and again responding to that influence. So action means that we also take risks, especially the risk of self-revelation. We need to put ourselves out into the world. And in order to put the best of ourselves out in the world, we need to know ourselves, right? So the lack of work can lead to a symptom of what he calls symbolic death, right? So it's not only financial stability, social prestige, or social company that we need in the world of work, but also an aspect of our aliveness. So yes, action has these positive qualities of making us feel needed, feel important, and feel active and alive. On the other hand, the action tends to have these two aspects of instrumental action, like seeing action as a tool of our intention and measured by achieving our ends. So this type of action is based on the logic of success, and it is the logic that is dominant in the majority of societies when we are in a constant pursuit of achieving something or winning something, where failure is the most feared outcome of every endeavor that we have. So when we win, so what happens, the dangers that Palmer brings to our attention are that when we win and we are successful, we don't learn, right? So we are not transformed inside. On the other hand, when we lose, we feel so defeated that we also don't learn anything. So we lose the opportunity to make action a part of our constant inner transformation. There is also an expressive action which engages us at a deeper level, expressing a conviction or an inner truth. And this expressive action is connected to creativity, right? So putting out something that is very deeply and personally related to who you are. Contemplation. Now, we tend to define action as being the world of work and duties and responsibilities, and contemplation as being relaxation, meditation, and we talk about a lot of different techniques that we have developed for that. So I'm quoting, "I understand contemplation to be any way that we can unveil the illusions that masquerade as reality and reveal the reality behind masks." So this is a much more useful definition of contemplation, because it talks about the contemplation as our way towards awakening. And contemplation is not only relaxation or retreating from the world, but it's also being able to see the world as it is and seeing through the illusions that our cultures put in front of us, right? So Palmer does not talk about specific contemplative techniques which we can use, right? So contemplation has these two dimensions, being intentional or unintentional, where we sometimes just look at things. We admire something that tends usually to be unintentional, or intentional when we go to a spa, when we meditate, when we go through a process of silence, and so on. So contemplation means that we assess the reality and also the outcome of our actions. Now, one of the problems that happens in our daily life is that we are highly invested in illusion, because seeing through the surface of things would bring pain. So seeing that so many systems are broken and causing suffering will make us feel suffering. So we prefer to paint the illusion and to go on through our frenzied action without too much contemplation, because contemplation makes us face our own pain and also the pain of the world. So, for example, he talks in the book about the military system and about parents facing the death of their children who are sent into war for reasons that are actually illusions, right? But they are served to people in order to protect them from that maddening pain that they would have, realizing that their children died for reasons that are not the actual reasons. So because we fear disillusionment, dislocation, and solitude, which are the result of noticing through the illusion of things. And think about a lot of spiritual processes that talk about this difficult process of seeing through the illusion, right? In Sanskrit, you have the Maya, or the illusion of the world, and seeing the truth that is behind it is putting us in a state of pain. Palmer is advising us to try and integrate action and contemplation in our daily lives instead of separating them and alternating them. So he talks about alternation as resulting in harried, violent, active lives, which are the lives that the majority of us are living, being in a constant rush, being in a constant stress, complaining, not feeling that we are enough, not feeling that we do enough, right? So this is the frenzied action. And this is alternated with escapist contemplation. We want in the weekend just to be locked in our house and sleep, or do something without being interrupted. Right? So these are alternating the action and contemplation without integrating them. So integrating them would mean that we allow for moments of contemplation throughout the day, where we can think about things, where we don't feel the pressure and the burden of the world impinging on us and us having to offer all the time our actions into the world. So he talks about this idea of wholeness as a journey downward, right? So we talked about that journey inside ourselves and the journey outside of ourselves. So the journey downward is similar to the metaphor of discovering the bottom of the ocean. So the bottom of the ocean is a scary place, but it's also a life-giving place. So it's the place where life springs from. So we need to face our fears in order to get to that unified field. So Palmer talks about that unified field as being at the bottom of our inner selves, where we discover a sense of interconnectedness and unity. But in order to get there, we need to face our inner demons, and we need to learn how to live with them. So facing our deepest fears, facing our deepest wounds, facing our difficult emotions, because they can also be sources of creativity and wisdom. So we did this in the on-site as well, but maybe you can engage in this ongoing reflection on your own inner demons. What are your difficult emotions? What are the wounds that resulted from difficult experiences that you had? Right? So being more aware of these aspects allow us to move towards wholeness. So further on, I will talk about the article by Karp and Legreid. I hope that I'm pronouncing their names well. What is your source? Right? Because we talked about the idea of leading from the source. And this is where Palmer is taking us into the source, right? That deep part of ourselves that is both full of danger and fear, and also is full of creativity and connectedness with others. So getting to the source is a process of individuation, self-reflection, and development. So this is the blind spot from which leaders operate in Scharmer's idea. In order to reach that source, we need to cross a threshold. So crossing the threshold is an interesting metaphor, because it means that we go from being a person living our own lives and performing our duties to becoming leaders, to actually wanting to change things, to actually wanting to contribute to the world, being willing to take responsibility for the goals and desires of other people. It also means that we need to accept our inner demons, so that we don't project them in the work that we do for other people. At this bottom of the U, right? So we talked about the U shape as this process of transformation from downloading old patterns of thought and performing duties that we are not really aware of, into connecting to who we are at a deep level, and from that connection emerging again with creativity towards the outside world. So at this bottom of the U, we also need to discover our will, or our courage to become leaders. So the courage to do things. So the act of taking leadership is not only the result of a person being more special than other persons, but of a person going through a process of shifting their inner place, and also a person experiencing particular experiences that make them take on the quality of leader. So the essence of leadership is to shift the inner place from which leaders operate, and this is in Scharmer's idea. So going through the threshold situations. In the history of analyzing different people who became important leaders, they talked about the situations of instability in organizations and people wanting someone to take responsibility. So leadership is a process of dynamic interaction between the person who is willing to develop a vision, who is willing to commit to action, who is willing to work with others, and people who are willing to take that or to follow that leadership. So leadership is not only one-sided, but it's a dynamic, systemic process. So leadership is a relationship. When people are in times of uncertainty, when they feel anxious and helpless, they project those feelings on a person who is willing to take these upon himself or herself. And then I thought about the difficulties of being a leader, because you need to be responsible for people's action. You need to be responsible for your own goals, for your own vision, and for what you bring into the world through other people. At the same time, you must be willing to take people's fears onto yourself and to solve that fear, right? So going into the source, trying to address those fears. There is a power imbalance between those who take leadership role and those willing to follow, right? So we tend to see leadership as someone with power is commanding, or is not always commanding, because that tends to be a bad word, but is leading or taking with him or her other people through that personal power that they hold, which has been true for models of leadership that existed before. But the newer models of leadership focus a lot on that dynamic of power, where you don't have a power over people, but a power with other people, right? So leadership emerges as a state of intersubjective consciousness when a person is able to sense, right? So this is about sensing, and Scharmer talks about sensing as trying to figure out what is it that people need, and making decisions that respond to the needs of people, not to the needs of an individual, which used to be the model of authoritarian leadership. Right, so now a leader has to sense what people need, has to sense what is it that they want to bring into the world, and to actually work with other people to bring those things into the world. So we talked about these redefinitions of power, not as something that is only negative or is only power over others. So we tended to define power as an unequal relationship between those who yield power and those who submit to it, also as a capacity of the individual to change things or to act upon the world. It is a process that depends on capacity and consent, right? So it is a dynamic relationship. It is also an attempt to act on the actions of others. And I quote this because I think it's a very good definition of leadership: the ability to influence people to act in their own interests rather than induce them to act according to the goals and desires of the leader, right, is what we talk about as leadership that comes from the source, right? So that source is the place where we connect deeply to ourselves, and we also connect to the needs and desires of other people. So leadership is not only the result of particular special personality traits of leaders, but also a constant process of adaptation and learning. It means that we take responsibility for the thoughts, emotions, and actions of other people, which is a very difficult place to be. And I must acknowledge that I've been grappling with these questions in my own journey, with that fear of taking responsibility for people's desires and emotions. In order to be able to do that, self-awareness is an essential trait. So knowing, how do I seek out what I want and avoid what I fear? Even knowing what I fear is an important step towards self-awareness. So there, at the bottom of the source, which is the place from where we can come out into the world, enriching it, because we respond to some of the needs that exist into the world in a way that makes us feel more vitality, makes us feel meaning, is also the source of will. Right? So assuming leadership means that you are willing to take power, which is not an easy. We think that power is great and that everybody wants power, and Nietzsche even talked about the human drive to have power. But a lot of us are actually fearing power. So the will tends to be a driving force because it directs our attention to achieving a goal. It is a source of initiatives, but the will must be discovered individually. So when Sharma talks about the open mind, open heart, and open will that we need in order to go to the source, open will is the one that is at the bottom of the pit, under the open mind and open heart, developing the will to take responsibility and the will to respond to the needs of the world and to actually sense what are those needs. So I will leave you with this table that you may reflect on, and you may write. I would like to put it in our discussion board. Defining yourself in terms of your past self as being the grounded self, your true self, which is the present self, and your possible future or ideal self, right? So we tend to assume leadership or to enrich the world through a combination of these three different aspects of who we are. So in the past, so what skills and knowledge do I have through my education, through my experience? How did I overcome difficulties? So what have been my difficult experiences and what have I learned from them? Then you go to your true self. What are your needs and what drives you? Right? So how strong is your will? How open is your heart? How open is your mind? And the last is the possible self. What is my purpose or vision? Right? We worked a little bit with this one in the immunity to change. And the last question, how can I enrich the world? And by responding to that question, you can also respond to the question of what makes you feel alive? What is it that makes you feel that joyful vitality that we feel in moments when we give the best of who we are? So I will leave you with this table, and I hope that you will all use it for your exploration of your source and the ability to connect to it. And I thank you very much for your attention.